Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today, and thank you very much to ECC for inviting me to your virtual conference that you are holding today on, most notably, the 24th of November, 2022. And who would have been able to guess that this would be the first day of the UCU strikes across the whole of the country in higher education. And so, it seems to me that the topic that you are discussing today and the title of your conference is incredibly relevant: Engagement Reimagined. A very important topic, especially when you're talking about issues like relationships, retention in the sector, and of course, performance. So it seems to me that this is a really important thing for us to be discussing at this particular point in time. So I would be very happy if colleagues would like to pop anything into the chat. Please feel free to chat amongst yourselves. I'll also keep an eye on that. And there will be a little bit of time at the end for any questions. Please feel free to pop those into the Q&A section, and I will be checking on that and will pull out some of the questions that people have. Of course, if you don't have many questions, we will just take it from there, and we can end the session whenever we're finished. So it's nice to see colleagues coming into the room, and I look forward to engaging with you through this session. So the key themes that I'll be talking about, because I know that this session annually, you often talk about an overview of what might be coming up in the next few years in higher education. As you know, I am a former Vice-Chancellor, but I am still very involved in higher education activities. I'm a member of the Higher Education Policy Institute's advisory board, so keep a very close eye on what's going on in higher education. So we'll say a little bit about that. And a little bit about some of the challenges facing the HE sector staffing needs as I see them. You will have your own views on that, so I look forward to hearing from you in terms of that. And then I want to talk about one, I think, of the solutions to some of the challenges. Just one, there are many others, but this is one that I'm currently focusing on, that how we can identify and nurture talented colleagues within our institutions, and how we can work with them to ensure that we create the kind of community that we are looking for in the sector. It is really important, I think, to look at those issues. And for me, that's a lot about relationships. It is absolutely about retention, and it is also about performance. So hopefully what I will be talking about will hit the mark of what you are talking about in all the sessions today. So I said I was going to say a little bit about higher education in the next few years. Well, I kind of want to start by saying, my goodness me, who knows? There are so many conflicting versions of what might happen in higher education. We've seen so many changes within the Westminster government over this year, and at different times, people have said quite different things about higher education. There have been a lot of different approaches in terms of what people have said and how they've engaged with higher educations. As well as that, of course, we are now facing on a wider stage war in Europe, and we really don't know how that is going to play out. Many of you will have heard on the news this morning that the energy blackouts which have affected Ukraine are now starting to affect other parts of Europe, and who knows where this is all going to go. You know, there's loads of uncertainty in the world that we're in. And I haven't even mentioned the challenges of post-pandemic. I know that in the first session we were talking about some of the issues to do with well-being, and I think we haven't yet seen the full outcomes of the effect that the pandemic had on everyone. So there's loads of uncertainty, although I do want to say that earlier this week, Rishi Sunak, our current Prime Minister, did actually make a very positive comment about higher education, which I think bodes well, in that he was talking about education in general and the importance of education. And his comment was that education is the closest thing that we have to a silver bullet to help growth in this country. And, you know, that is a welcome statement. It is, of course, true that ensuring that we have the right kind of education in our country will make a very significant difference to improvements in growth, but it is the right kind of education, and quite what the government might mean by the right kind of education is again, it's uncertain. There certainly has been a lot of calls for more apprenticeships, better apprenticeships, and that too many people are going to higher education. So I repeat what it says on that slide. Who knows exactly where this is going to go? Alongside that, I think there's a number of other kinds of challenges. I'm going to start with the Indy Ref, which we had a ruling on yesterday saying that the next Indy Ref 2 could not be held unless the Westminster government approved it. However, Nicola Sturgeon is very keen to use the next general election as an approach to Scottish independence. And, you know, if that was to happen, that would be very significant for the whole country. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that what we are seeing is a kind of combination of wider issues that aren't specifically about higher education, plus issues that relate very specifically to higher education, like the Office for Students, like comments about we can't have Harry Potter studies. By the way, there are no Harry Potter studies anywhere in the UK, but that was a comment by, at the time, a higher education minister, and it is part of a long ongoing view that higher education has dumbed down and does not have the right kinds of curricula to support what the country needs, which goes back to the point I was just making about what government sees as the right kind of education. And there is also, as we know, a major debate battle, and indeed an act in the process of being signed off by government around freedom of speech in higher education. There is a lot of debate about whether there is any need for this legislation. However, government believes that there is, and there certainly are some people who feel that they are unable to set out their views when they are in higher education, that there is a kind of a university speak, and that is what is acceptable, and not anything else. So, you know, the whole issue of culture wars is a major problem for the perception of higher education, and therefore that's a problem for us in terms of how the rest of society perceives us. And I would want to say, in the context of this conference, I think it has an effect on morale. I think it has an effect on how people who work in the sector feel about themselves. It seems to me that people in higher education want to feel that they are contributing to important things in our society. I think as a sector, we care. We care enormously about what we can do to make our world better. And in particular, because we work in the UK, to make the UK better. But we are often global in our outlook. Also, in terms of the offers for students, which certainly affects many universities, but those in England, you know, they are talking about, they are now moving from the initial stage where they set up what regulation was going to be, and they're now moving into full implementation of regulation. And indeed, they are starting to look at some very specific areas, as our colleagues in Wonky talk about, boots on the ground, where they'll be going in and looking at individual programs in institutions, and in some cases implementing fines if they feel that those courses are not complying with the conditions of registration. While we don't know everything and things are very uncertain, we do know certain things that will affect us in the future. And as part of that, I was just talking about IndieRef 2 in the context of Scotland. I think it is important to really recognise that policy within higher education is pulling apart. The context in Scotland is very, very different to England. Wales has just recently decided to reform its funding council and bring together all post-16. So there isn't one set of policies for higher education in the UK. And indeed, in the context of this conference and colleagues who work in different areas of HR, the growing differences make it harder to do work across boundaries, because the expectations of universities in Scotland are different to those in England, are different to those in Wales. And with the lack of the government in Northern Ireland, I think that creates huge problems for colleagues in Northern Ireland. So, you know, the complexity that we are dealing with just in terms of the nations is significant. But it gets worse in the sense that the sector itself is becoming much more diverse. And this is a policy that actually was introduced particularly in England, back in 2011, where a whole new group of institutions were given university status, which we should celebrate. And diversity, I think, is a really good thing. However, it does mean that because we have different sorts of institutions and now a growing independent higher education sector, and here I've just put on my slides, and of course you have access to them beyond this conference. You know, in the past, when certainly I started out on my career 30 years ago in higher education, there really was only, there were some small specialist institutions which are looked at and cared for by Guild HE, which existed, has a long and proud tradition. And there was Universities UK, although it wasn't called that at the time. But we now have independent HE, and they vary very significantly. What we call the private sector moves from not-for-profit, small theology colleges all the way through to very large for-profit multinational institutions. And all of this, if you're thinking about human resources, the issues that people face in those different situations are quite significant. And it does beg the question, I think, whether in fact we can continue to have one set of pay negotiations, whether differential pay bargaining becomes much more common. It is already started to pick up, but you know, how much more can UCEA hold the line? It becomes much more difficult. Also today, with the challenges on a strike day for staff in HE, where issues of pay and of course pensions, but also conditions are at the forefront, we also have to bear in mind that more than 30% of UCEA members are now carrying a deficit. And so, you know, institutions themselves are in a difficult place, which takes us on to the financial social environment becoming much more challenging. So on the one hand, we have a cost of living crisis, we have taxes going up, which puts more pressure on staff, and what staff are finding, you know, it difficult. It is also, of course, a huge pressure on students. And I know colleagues in the room are extremely concerned and pay attention to their students in their institution. Many students work part-time for their institution, and so this is a challenge as well for students. And student rents, we know, is a significant issue. Alongside that, as I've just been saying, inflation is eating into university budgets. We have not seen in England an increase in student fees, which is the bulk of where university funding in England comes from, for quite a long time, despite the fact that inflation in higher education is running in the mid to high teens, so higher than what is considered kind of standard inflation. And of course, in Scotland, you know, Scottish students don't pay fees, and the government gives a grant, which is also seriously challenging for those institutions. And in all of that environment, post-COVID, people continue to be asking questions of themselves. You know, what do they want? What are they looking for in their futures? We know we've seen a number of people deciding to retire. We've seen more people asking for flexible working. And we have a very significant divide within our staff between those who are desperate to be on campus and those who still would rather not be on campus. So, you know, this is all very significant. I think one of the biggest questions, you know, is how much all our colleagues, including yourselves, are prepared to continue to do above and beyond. Is there more to life than work? And the importance of well-being comes into that as well. And this morning, there was a very interesting report by HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, which, as I say, I'm on the advisory board, on staff belonging and questions about staff belonging. And they talked about 4 areas being really significant for staff. The point about staff feeling connected to their institution. Now, this has always been an issue for academic staff who often feel more of a connection with their discipline than with the institution where they live. The sense of connection post-COVID, where people were living much more in an isolated way, and what people have prioritized is connections with friends and family. The connection with work is something that we need to be working on and thinking about. Questions of inclusion: who is included in university communities? Who feels that their voice and themselves is not represented by the leadership of the institutions? Questions of race and ethnicity, of disability, of sexualities, and questions of trans people. You know, these are things that we do have to pay a lot more attention to, and the support that we are able to give our colleagues is really important in this. And then how we help people develop a sense of ownership of what they are doing on a daily basis. So that brings me to want to talk about one area that I think, with all these challenges, that we can focus on. And that, for me, and Karen, this is what I'm particularly focusing on now, which is growing and supporting talent. So identifying and nurturing talent within higher education. And it is within our institutions that I think we need to be starting. And I know this is an issue that has been discussed amongst colleagues like yourselves, but I just think it's even more important than ever. And in fact, for me, I think if I reflect back over my 30 years, starting as a lecturer on a temporary contract, and moving through into senior management, and ending up as a vice chancellor for 12 years. For me, the issue, a lot of it is around people who are emergent leaders in higher education, because I think they sit at the heart of what our institutions are. And there is less support for their needs their leadership needs, less support for their needs across the sector, fewer courses. That most of the support tends to focus on people in more senior roles. But actually it is at that emergent stage that people particularly need the support. We've been conducting some research about this at Minerva, where I'm currently Director of Leadership Development. And we found that there still is, in a lot of institutions, a kind of notion of, well, have a go at this and see if this really is what you want to do. Emergent leaders, and certainly on the academic side in many institutions, are still there on 3 to 5 year basis before they so-called go back to the institution. And it almost is though we create a sense that we don't see this as significant. However, for me, emergent leaders are the heart of the institution. Senior leaders cannot fulfill their mission without the support of those people in that middle tier of the institution. They look up and they look sideways and they look down. They are probably more important in how implementation of strategy and change management can happen than anything else. So I wanted to just give you a bit of a heads up of a survey and the results of that survey. You are the first people to hear this. There is still a bit of work to do on this, and we will be producing a report in the spring of next year. But here's just some highlights that have come out from this. We asked colleagues a whole series of different questions about emergent leaders. And some of the things that came out was that it's important to have that these people have opportunities to influence the direction of their unit or department and to support change. That was seen as really crucial to their role, and the feeling that sometimes that was present and sometimes it really wasn't, that they needed to be trusted with their units. But their biggest challenge, the thing that came out most in terms of this tier of colleagues, their biggest challenge was staffing issues and that notion of becoming a leader. There is a sense within higher education that leadership is not as valued as being, a very successful researcher. But, without leaders, the framework that a very successful researcher needs to be able to carry out their work will not be present. From the survey, it became clear that many colleagues are reluctant to take on leadership roles and feel ambivalent about the idea of leadership itself. But within the survey, colleagues also really recognize that they are absolutely vital and they need to be able to motivate others. They need important people skills and communication skills, and they need to be self-aware as well. And they need to be able to develop a positive environment. Now, in order to achieve all of these things, it is actually really important that we are supporting these people, mentoring came up as really crucial, and a real desire for there to be practical, relevant courses that enable these people to develop those skills so that they can thrive. And with them thriving, so too will the institutions be able to thrive. And it's especially, I think, important at this particular point in our history, where the sense of community and the sense of belonging is being challenged, I think, quite significantly. The final point that came out from the survey that we have conducted really knocks a nail into that point that I've just been making, that people are choosing to take on leadership roles for career enhancement, but less in order to serve their colleagues and the community that they're in. And I find that just really quite a upsetting finding from this research, that of course there are still people who want to do it because they want to serve their community, because they want to improve things for their colleagues and for their students and for their institution. But that increasingly it's more that leadership is seen as a path to career enhancement. And that concept of leadership as service, which is something I feel absolutely passionately about, is being challenged and lost. You know, we are there to serve. That's what leaders are for. They're not there to, you know, kind of be enhancing themselves. Leadership is about enabling others to succeed. That is the most important thing. And we need to help our colleagues to understand that and develop the tools to achieve that. I just wanted to end with a few points about why I think harnessing the power of emerging leaders is really valuable. The first thing I'd like to say is I think we do need to work from the colleagues that we have in our institutions. It is actually increasingly difficult, as we are finding that, you know, if we don't value the people we have, then it actually becomes more difficult to create that community we've just been talking about. So work with colleagues you have. They're already in your organization. You don't need to spend time and money on recruitment. And a whole lot of wonderful things come from that, building on their understanding of the organization. Lots of studies, I don't need to tell you this, you all know this better than I do. Lots of studies suggest that development and promotion opportunities within organizations really help with retention. If people can see a future for themselves in the organization, then that will help with retention. And, you know, I don't need to tell you, you all know this, the best people are the people who can find jobs elsewhere, recognize them and give them clear pathways, and encourage them to understand and feel motivated by that idea of leadership as service. If senior leaders value emerging leaders, it creates a virtuous circle of success and job satisfaction increases. And I think for me, as just one thing I'd like to leave with you, it's that in the context of what you're talking about today. And if I just end on that final comment, which I know was echoed in the first session, we are all going to need each other. And so supporting each other is, if I can say anything, that to me is what higher education is going to need. It's challenging times. Let's support each other and work together. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. And thank you for the lovely expressions of all your images and all the rest of it. And I now see that we have a few questions. And oh, good morning. Hello, Ian Hodson. Nice that you're in this, having talked me into doing this session in the first place. So Ian has a question which says, how important is it that we balance to grow your own model with introducing our sector to those from other sectors with different experience and skill sets? Okay. I think it is important to have some kind of a mix and a balance. And Ian will know that when I was Vice Chancellor at Lincoln, that was something I always thought that was important. I also thought that the key thing, though, is that you do not want, when you have your staff surveys, you do not want people to be saying things like, oh, they always bring in people from outside and people in the institution have no opportunities. And I'm afraid that is something which, when you do benchmarking, the organizations that do that benchmarking across the sector say it is a theme that comes up, that there is a perception in a lot of institutions that in order to get promoted or in order to be supported with something, that that colleagues need to move to another institution. So I guess, Ian, in answer to your questions, you do need a balance, but I don't think it's 50-50. I do think you need, at this particular point in time, with the way colleagues are feeling, we need to be enhancing and talking a lot and communicating effectively about the opportunities that we have within our institutions and supporting the talent that we have within institutions. So it is a balance, but at the moment, I think, given the way things are, I would say we probably need to have a bit of a focus on people in our own institutions. I hope that answered your question. So from David Williams, hello David. Middle level leadership has long been an issue in HE. Well, thank you. I'm glad you agree with me. We do need to motivate colleagues to lead from a service point of view, but how do you promote the culture and recognition systems to do so? Really good question. I think this is a debate that needs to be had within the sector, and I do have a few ideas. So we are going to be running out of time, so I'm going to say just a couple of things, but I think it needs to be debated in the sector and within institutions. For me, I think that you can encourage and recognize service and celebrate service activities. I think that you can highlight role models of people who have gone above and beyond for their particular community, whether that's a department or a unit. And I think we need a call to arms about what higher education's purpose is and help people to understand how they are contributing to that. But the biggest thing that I think we can do within the context of recognition systems is develop an appropriate level of celebration and reward that is for service activities. That to me is the most important thing. Colleagues, I'm aware we are about to run out of time, and I know that you have a busy day. I also know that it's the end of November and everyone's feeling, well, I won't use the word, a bit like, you know, we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you for all you do for the sector, and go well. Thank you very much for your time today.